Good morning. So we'll continue with the next session, that is research approaches. In the previous session, we have seen research plagiarism, research ethics, and what are the consequences of plagiarism and how to avoid the plagiarism we have seen. In this session, we will see research approaches, its types, two types, that is qualitative research approach and quantitative research approach. Then at the end, we will see data analysis and interpretations. And these are very important while doing the literature study. So what do you mean by research approach? It can be defined as the collection of procedures and plans that decides the overall process in research, and it decides the methods for data collection, analysis, and interpretation. As we know that while doing the literature study, we need to find out different data, previous data and current data, and how we can do the analysis and how we interpret that result in our research study is nothing but research approach. The concept of research approach is followed in entire research process. Throughout this will be helpful, and there are many factors in selection of this research approach, like what is your research objective, what is the experience in of research, and what are the audience or what are the readers think about that particular topic. So these are all incorporated in research approaches. So there are mainly two types of research approaches. One is qualitative and second one is quantitative. So from the name itself, we can see that qualitative is one, and we want to determine or to find presence or absence of an element in that study particular. So if we are finding out some research gap, and for that purpose whatever study we are doing, so that is qualitative, or presence or absence of an element in the study. And wherever we want to determine level of that element's presence or absence, then this comes under quantitative methods. So wherever quantification is there, that approach is comes under quantitative approach, and wherever there is related to some parameter or variable, there is no quantification. So that time we need qualitative research. So quantitative techniques make use of quantitative techniques make use of advanced statistical techniques. So as I mentioned, that quantitative means some quantification is there. So for that purpose, the researcher has to use statistical techniques, whereas qualitative methods employ like open-ended questions, gaps, or some unanswered questions, which utilizes these direct quotations. The researcher can utilize quantitative methods in the form of statistical techniques for hypothesis testing, as well as and qualitative methods in the form of semi-structured interviews, discussions. Uh, so both these methods increase the researcher's understanding about the particular topic or about the problem undertaken. So we'll start with first one, that is qualitative research approach. So qualitative research is employed to study the human behavior and habits. It is also useful in the product management or in any field for identifying the product feature and how it can be sold, or what are the gaps or what are the requirements needs of to solve certain problem, comes under this qualitative approach. So for example, a product manager is planning to launch a mobile phone, would definitely want to know the habits and preferences of a target segment. That means the users, what kind of mobile phones or uh, features the users want, that that is taken into consideration, and then those some of those are incorporated in that design. And once this is done, so this comes under qualitative research. And after this, the quantitative research is employed to test, to verify whether the design is acceptable as per the standards or not. So for testing, for verification, this quantitative research is important. And before that, for ideas and some innovations things, this qualitative research approach is important. So it is also considered as first stage of quantitative research. So qualitative research can be considered as prior stage of quantitative research. So once we have done the qualitative analysis, then only we can go for the quantitative analysis or research. In this approach, researchers generate various ideas, concepts that can be converted into logical and testable hypotheses in future, or some of the gaps or some of the limitations in the previous work or previous research is identified. These hypotheses can then be comprehensively tested and analyzed using various techniques. So that's what quantitative research. For example, a survey can be conducted before the launch of a shampoo brand, and this survey can find several popular brands. So, like this, qualitative research can then be conducted around these brands so that a lot of time, effort, and resources can be saved and one can move fastly. So, there are certain characteristics of qualitative research. So, what are those? So, it is a process to understand the uniqueness of situations in particular context. It is the process to understand the uniqueness of various situations in a particular field. Second one is the focus towards data collection. So the researchers focus towards data collection and analysis process is one of the point. So here researcher is not doing the actual analysis, but what kind of data, what kind of parameter variable can be found out, that is, or how, what kind of ideas are generated, and for that particular idea what kind of data is required to test or verify is the focus in qualitative research. So it involves a lot of field work, that is surveys, study, literature study. One can go for uh, at different workplaces, or one can take the interviews, discussions with people in that particular field, or one can go through the books or articles, manuscripts in that particular field. So the research strategy which is employed in qualitative research is inductive in nature. This research methodology relies on abstractions. So some abstractions are derived by the researchers. From that, it is dependent on that. Then it depends on the concepts. Then testing of hypothesis rather than relying on a body of existing theory. So these are the points on which this this is dependent. So these are some of the characteristics. Now again, these qualitative research approaches are classified. So these are classified based on four important approaches. So first one is ethnographic approach, field research, phenomenological approach, and grounded theory. So we'll see one by one. Ethnographic approach. So it is an qualitative research and it includes in-depth study of the cultural groups and is extensively used in the field of anthropology. So in-depth study of particular cultural groups is nothing but ethnographic approach. So the definition of world culture has greatly changed over time. While culture earlier referred to only predefined ethnic groups that belongs to a certain geographical location, and but it has now come to include almost any organization or any group. So any research group or any organization, research organization in research. For example, this approach is now being applied to study the culture of non-profit organizations or NGOs and so on. So, as ethnographic approach studies cultures, there is a multitude of methods that can be applied to greater results and ethnographer designs. So among these, most popular is method of participants observation. So this is very uh, popular method. So what is done here under this technique, ethnographer becomes a part of the group that he or she aims to study. A particular research group he want to study, he becomes a part of that particular group, and by being an active participant, the ethnographer is able to take for wide array of field notes. So there being no limitations to what can be observed and recorded and how the same need to be achieved. So becoming a member, then he will be able to take different notes, recordings and observations. It is also used in administrative sciences where practice of field research and recording observation is not as detailed uh, like in the cultures. Then second one is phenomenological approach. So it aims at identifying a phenomenon or a theory. So for identifying a phenomenon or a theory or a concept, this approach is used. So how it is done? By analyzing the behavior of those who participate in that particular uh, group. This approach has evolved from the study of philosophy. That's why the name is given as phenomenological approach. So, from the study of philosophy of existentialism and other such behavioral theories. So, it depends on we know phenomenon and theory. So, it evolved from philosophy of existentialism as and other such behavioral theories. So, one example is in public administration research. This approach is applied to interpret how people perceive a certain event or a symbol and what meaning they can attach to it. Suppose in administrative, how group of people or people perceive a certain event or certain activity or a symbol and how they think about that. Researchers collect data through narratives. So it is like abstractions, in-depth personal interviews of participants, their personal experiences through discussions and other such techniques, or by conducting a survey. So these are some of the uh, ways by which researchers collect data for in this phenomenological approach. Now the third one is field research. So it is another systemized approach. The first two we have seen, that is ethnographic and phenomenological group research. But this field research is a systemized approach to qualitative research that aims to study a situation or an event over a long period of time. So, how a situation occurs or how an event occurs over a long period of time. So, to study that phenomenon is or systematically is nothing but field research, and it is done through maybe interactions and observations. If, for example, we want to take reading of or we want to analyze the solar panel, then over the long period is, for example, uh, 12 months reading if one person takes, as well as he talks with the people who are involved in the solar panel manufacturing, or he observes, researcher observes. So these all things comes under this field research. And this method aims to closely observe the daily activities of a social group under prevalent conditions. So various different conditions, depending on the different weather conditions, the readings may change. So daily activities or daily readings one has to take. Being a long-term extensive approach, it is often termed to be longitudinal research. So this is also known as longitudinal research. The unique characteristics. These unique characteristics can make the research carry on for months, for sometimes even years. So this approach is more often than not used to gather qualitative data. So it uh, collects the qualitative data, and this is a longitudinal research. It follows the procedure of selection of event, observations of subject, and recordings of findings. So, for example, field research may aim to study the daily activities of residents of a slum and how they manage to organize their lives there. Through careful observations over a period of several months, researcher aims to study how these slum dwellers respond to the changes in both internal and external environment and continuously make recordings of the same. So this is nothing but field research that uh, study the daily activities of a residents of a slum area and how they manage their lives. So this is one point. Then through observations over a long period of time, one can see how they dwellers, how these slum dwellers respond for a changing environment or for changing weather conditions, environmental and while doing these observations, continuously it is recorded. The researcher also gathers data by interacting with the social group and understanding their lives. So while doing this, one can interact with the particular group of people there, or one can discuss with the group of people, and from that also one can understand the happenings in their life and then correlate something. So once the researcher is satisfied with the observations, the recordings are made compiled into what is known as nothing but a case study report. So the case study report provides a comprehensive picture of that particular subject or subjects in question and can readily used by for further analysis. So once that all the observations recordings are compiled and prepared a report, which is nothing but a case study report, and this comprehensive study in, includes various data, pictures related to the questions, problems, and then it can be readily used for further analysis. The, in this above case, the compiled finding may then be used to study the economic conditions of the slum dwellers and how changes can be brought about their benefit, or what are the measures taken during adverse environmental conditions. So these all things can be further done. Now the last uh, type is grounded theory. So it is a complex and inverted approach to qualitative research that was formulated and developed by Glaser and Strauss in 60s. Unlike other approaches, like other earlier three approaches, this approach aims to first determine what needs to be observed or what questions or what problems need to be solved or answered. Then extensively gather data that summarize the said operation. So here first it is determined what is need to be observed or what recordings need to be taken or what are the problems occurring in the particular field, what are the questions which are unanswered, and then extensively related to that data is gathered or collected and then summarize the observations. So this approach does not merely aim to prove an abstract theory but aims to prove one that is supported by in-depth observations. So this is very important. So it is supported by observations and recording based on the facts. So how it is done, grounded theory. So for that purpose, the first step towards this grounded theory is to identify a phenomenon or generate a question. So this is the first step. That means identify what are the problems or what are the phenomena and which will be helpful in research, and this forms the center of the process. So first is always identifying the phenomenon or generating a question or identifying the problem. This question need to be rigid and can be modified as the research progresses. So this need not to be rigid, sorry. This question need not to be rigid and can be modified as the research progresses. So the question should not be a rigid one. So it should be flexible and it should be modified as the research progresses. Once the question has been identified, the researcher starts to gather data and develop linkages between theory and data. So once the question is finalized, so researchers starts to gather data, information, and uh, he will think and interlink the collected data observations to develop linkages between the what theory is there and how it is correlating with the observations or data gathered. So this step requires huge investment of time and effort because one cannot get easily the data or the observations. So it requires sufficient time and efforts to be taken care, because there is no limit to what data can be useful and what cannot be useful. So initial stage, while gathering the data, the researcher doesn't know that which data or observations are useful and which are not as much. So after this page, the researcher is merely engaged in verification of data, that is whatever other data is there. So it is verified and then its linkage to the theory and then summarizing or concluding the findings. So for doing these steps like identify the problem, then gathering the data, then developing the linkage and then summarizing. So following analytical strategies are used. So which are those strategies? First one is coding. So coding systematically categorizes qualitative data. Excuse me. So the coding systematically categorizes qualitative data and its implications. While at the beginning, the researcher uses open coding to derive the useful concepts from the data and categorizes them into broadly defined concepts. So initially, researcher uses open coding to derive useful concepts from the data and then categorizes them into broadly defined concepts at later stage. The researcher progresses to selective coding, where the data is constantly being compared to concepts and recordings being made. So one can go for selective coding, where the data is constantly changing and it is compared with some standard or some benchmark values, and then from that the recordings are taken up. Second one is memoing. So memoing is process of recording one's own thoughts and ideas. So recording or uh, jotting o- jotting down one's own thoughts and ideas throughout the study, and is often imagined to be the recording of marginal notes and comments. Recording of marginal notes and comments. Like coding, it initially takes the form of open memoing, whereas later on it graduates to selective memoing in line with the core concepts. So it is similar to coding. Initially takes the form of open memoing, whereas later on it graduates to selective memory. Integrative diagrams and systems. So third strategy is diagrams. So diagrams are used to graphically represent the observations of researchers and depict the data in a manner that simplifies its link to the developing theory. So this is very useful graphical representations of the observation and depict the data in a manner that simplifies its links to the theory. So these in integrative diagrams may be in the form of graphs, maps, or some cartoons, some pictures, or some tables, some cases. So this is one point. And the second strategy is interactive sessions are another useful technique where different members of the research learn are brought together under one roof to discuss and debate their observations and share ideas and insights. So like in a symposium or a conference or a webinar, so the group from the same topic, the same research area, that come together and they discuss and then debate about the findings or about the issues they have found out or about the solutions they are providing for the particular theory. So this is comes under interactive sessions. So this analysis may be done like through the diagrams, graphs, charts, pie charts, or through the discussion, or through the some data, or through some brainstorming session. So this last one is done integrative diagrams and sessions. Now, after seeing this, what are the techniques of collecting the qualitative data? So, what are the different ways by which one can collect the qualitative data? We are not talking about quantity, so we are talking about qualitative data. So, the techniques of collecting qualitative data. So, first one is depth interviews. So, wait. Okay. So, depth interviews aims to achieve the opinions and perspective of small group of individuals on particular idea or situation by conducting the comprehensive interviews with them. So if you are doing uh, research on particular topic, then who are the persons or individuals who are involved or related to that particular field, one can go with go for interview with those individuals or those groups, small groups, regarding that particular idea or particular questions, problems, and conduct the comprehensive interview. So for example, in order to gauge the impact of new economic norm on the members of a particular social class, the researcher may conduct in-depth interviews with few members of the social class to understand how they feel about it and what socio-economic impact they feel may result or have resulted from it. So if we take an example of electrical field like electric vehicle, so one can go and take the interviews from the battery manufacturers, motors, motors related industries, or the one who designs these things, and also the power electronic designers. And one can take the in-depth interview or comprehensive interview with those people, and then he or she can summarize those things, and from that he can collect the qualitative data. Second one is focus group. So it is defined as gathering of several persons led by trained moderator to discuss and debate ideas and opinions on a particular subject. Suppose if I uh, if same uh, topic or same area different people are working, so if they gather over one platform, to discuss and debate those particular ideas and give their opinions. So that is nothing but focus group. And generally, actually, it is evolved from the sociology studies to analyze the saleability of new product. So again, in this, the first step is to determine the subject. So what is the subject we need to determine? That needs to be discussed. Next, as the members of the group begin to exchange ideas, the moderator silently observes them and ensures that the discussion takes the course it is expected to. So once the topic is decided, then the group of that particular topic start to exchange their ideas, opinions, and there is one moderator who silently observes all of these, and any deviations or non-participation by the members is addressed or resolved by the moderator. If someone is deviating the topic or someone is not participating, then moderator can address those things. And at the end of the discussion, observations and recommendations of group are attained and recorded by the moderator. So once this discussion is over, after certain finite time, the observations and recommendations of group are attained and recorded by the moderator to lay the groundwork for further research and analysis. So generally, this kind of activities we see in the conference uh, presentations, like 3-4 persons give their presentations, then there are some uh, one or two moderators, and then they observe silently, and at the end they recommend the their recording to the moderator. The groups are attained and it is recorded by the moderator to lay the groundwork for further research or analysis. The third one is projective technique. So in this method, individuals are encouraged to express their opinions on the behavior of others under situations that have been prefabricated as ambiguous and vague. Questioning is indirect and informal and designed to observe the underlying notions of persons. In the process of providing their own opinions of others, these individuals unknowingly provide insights into themselves. So this is like projective technique. In the process providing their own opinions of others, individuals unknowingly provide insights into themselves. So researchers record their observations that help to interpret the behavior of these persons. Now, what are the pros of qualitative research? So it it can be easily employed. Easily one can any researcher can employ this qualitative research approaches, and the research objective is complex and the answer is not a clear cut yes or no. So most of the times this is the case that there is no binary answers like yes or no. So one has to go with the qualitative research, qualitative approach. These designs are very easy processes to carry out, especially in situations where organizations has resource constraints, because not always we get the required data easily from the libraries or from the departments or from the laboratories. So therefore for that purpose one has to go for the interviews, coding and all these things. Since the scope of this qualitative research is extensive, it always generates some data and it can be used by the organizations. However, if hypothesis is not proved, then there could be a lot of wasteful effort and expenditure. If hypothesis is not defined properly or not proved, then whatever data or effort has taken to collect the data to through the interviews, through the studies, field studies, so it is of waste. Unlike a quantitative study, a qualitative study does not involve constraints of sample size requirements. So there is no requirement of sample size. For example, a case study analysis can be done even if the respondent size is small. So a case study analysis can be done with the small respondents also. So there are some cons also of this qualitative research approaches. So even though qualitative research is not as time consuming as quantitative research, it can still require substantial amount of planning and analysis. So lot of planning and analysis is required for the researcher. One of the biggest limitation is qualitative data are not possible to analyze using directly mathematical analysis. So as there are no mathematical or quantification numbers or quantification analysis, so it is always difficult. It relies a lot on personal observations and opinions. So individuals, depending on the individual's perception, this may changes. So it relies on the personal observations. Qualitative research is unique in nature up to a great extent. Hence, it suffers from a limitation that it cannot be replicated again. So it cannot be replicated again. If some quantity data is there, it can be taken for the further studies, but qualitative research, it cannot be repeated again. So there is thus the problem of reusing the researched data by some other researchers who want to conduct the research again. So one has to conduct the research again through his proper planning and analysis. So these are some of the cons. Now comes the second research approach, that is quantitative research approach, and it is mostly used in the research, scientific researchers or technology researchers. These are also called true science because there are it's talk about numbers and facts and actual data quantity, because it heavily relies on the mathematical and statistical techniques. So it relies mostly on mathematical and statistical techniques to obtain the result of the research activity. Quantitative research is mostly used in physical science, social science, education, management, engineering, etc. Its nature is exactly opposite from that of the qualitative research. We know quantitative research employs a standardized format. So there is a standardized format for generating and testing various hypothesis testing models. So these hypotheses have to be tested using some mathematical and statistical techniques. So for verifying the hypothesis, these are tested through mathematical and statistical techniques by using statistical techniques. The use of randomization is a must during the selection of research respondents. There has to be a control group also, and the research methodology should typically allow for one variable to be manipulated at a time, as otherwise the statistical analysis may become complex. So sometimes one variable is allowed to be manipulated. It should also allow the experiment to be replicated by other researchers. So same experiment can be replicated by other researchers, which was not the case with the qualitative research approach. So this is the what we can say pros. Now, what are the characteristics? So it is based on numbers, facts, relies extensively on mathematical and statistical techniques. So this is one of the first characteristic. It deals with analysis of data. It involves undertaking of large number of studies that involve specific focus. It may involve investigation of causal hypothesis or the examination of a large number of specific occurrences. It involves some amount of detachment from the researcher, which leads to the production of objective numerical data. So it leads to the production of objective numerical data and occurring in very controlled environment because where it is involved with some numbers and facts. The researcher design is predetermined. It employs measurements and analysis in a systematic and structured manner. So this is the advantages or characteristic of quantitative research. And this one already we seen in the previous slide, repeated by others researchers. One can repeat the same experiments or one can repeat the same method. The validity and reliability can be expressed numerically using some statistical techniques. And here, in quantitative research, the emphasis is on evidences, not on the theory or concepts. So this quantitative research is again classified, uh, and here this is classified in three types. One is inferential approach, experimental approach, simulation approach. So we'll see one by one. Inferential approach. So it is used to infer the conclusions from set database. So already some set database is available. From that, one can derive the conclusions or summarize the conclusion or infer the conclusions from that database. Conditions used herein are generic in nature, and the researcher aims to link the characteristics. So researcher is aiming to link the characteristics of sample population to the larger population. The aim of the researcher is to analyze data and draw conclusions. Beyond the most obvious ones, use descriptive statistics to describe these observations. For example, mm, a researcher aims study the opinion of members of a particular age group, such as undergraduate students, towards a new university norms. Then he or she will consult a small population of this group and infer conclusions based on the recorded data for the entire group. So suppose some new norms are defined in the university, then the researcher will not take each and every individual's data, or he will not record the each and every individual's undergraduate students data. He will collect samples from each class or each division, and then from that divisions the researcher can infer the conclusions, or he can able to analyze the trend and then draw the conclusions for the all the students. So that is nothing but inferential approach. The second one is experimental approach. So it is used to study the effect of one variable of the population over another. When any of these variables is altered, then experiments are within the purview of hard science such as physics. It enables greater control over environment, and in this approach the first step is to formulate the theory. Then next is quantitative experiments are carried out or performed, and after performing the experiments, data is collected, gathered, and readings are taken, and then those are analyzed, either proves or disapproves the whatever suggested theory. So it is most useful in an environment where natural phenomenon can be automatically assumed. Even in the cases where ample amount of research is already available, theories already exist, this experimental approach can be used to further solidify and exemplify the theories. So we see most of the times in mathematical uh, innovations. So theories are there, but experimental approach is not seen. So that's why this is very important. Experimental approach can be used to further solidify or to verify the conceptual or the theories which are already been proposed. And the last approach is simulation approach. It is different from the first one, inferential or experimental approach. So it depends on the type of environment it deals with. While the other approaches characterized by natural environment simulation approach, it operates under an artificially created environment. So simulation approach operates under artificially created environment, like simulation softwares are there in, we see MATLAB programming one can do, or one can simulate, or one can write the mathematical equations and then perform the analysis and then take the results, or MATLAB simulink can be used. Similarly, different softwares like ETAP, PSCAD, PSync, then MI Power, these kind of simulink softwares can be used, which are artificially created or virtually representing the real-time dynamical systems. So it refers to conduct of numerical model as a representation of dynamic process. So it helps in foreseeing future conditions, thereby enabling researchers to build models that accommodate the same. So the major advantage of simulation approach is one can it is helpful in foreseeing the future conditions, or one can simulate the adverse conditions, load conditions, or adverse uncertainties, and then verify what kind of results can be obtained, and accordingly in real time the researcher can implement those controllers or those things, so that at adverse conditions also the system will be stable and work robustly. So that is the advantage of simulation approach. Then there are again techniques for collecting this quantitative data. One is observations. So it is to observations are needed to interpret and analyze the phenomenon or recordings. Then second one is survey. It is systematic collection of data with the help of some questionnaires. Then the third one is experiments. So these are conducted, experiments are conducted by the researcher, and he or may he or she may discuss with the experimental groups or control groups, and which is exposed to the experiment, and the while control group is which is not. So in an experiment, an independent variable or condition is altered to study its effect on dependent variable or condition. So that is the advantage of experimental uh, approach or experimental technique. Now, what are the pros of this quantitative research approach? So it is very good and standardized way of obtaining results as well as testing the hypothesis. So good and standardized way of obtaining results, because it involves or it deals with the quantity or numbers. This methodology has remained same over the years and is considered as standardized. So it has remained same. It has not been changed for the over the years, and it is considered as standardized approach. The employment of statistical analysis reaches the attainment of an outcome that can be easily discussed, published, replicated by others also. The research throws up the results which are real and unbiased in nature. So whatever results are obtained, so they will reflect as real and unbiased numbers, unbiased theory. So the research can also effectively filter out external factors. It is very effective in analyzing the results of qualitative research and also generate platform for further researchers. So quantitative research is effective in analyzing results of qualitative research. So whatever data is collected during qualitative research, so that can be analyzed using quantitative research, and it is also helpful for the further studies. So there are some cons of this quantitative research also. First one is it is time consuming and expensive activity. Then therefore it has to be planned in advance, carefully planned in advance, and requires construction of control group for the results to be true and unbiased. Then second one is it requires extensive use of statistical and mathematical techniques. So one should have sound knowledge of statistics and mathematics while doing the research, and it requires these techniques, because many of the times researchers who may not be well acquainted with these techniques face problem. Then statistical technique also require many conditions and retesting on the part of researcher. So what will happen? This increases the complexity of the activity, and also the time taken to complete the research is more. Then quantitative research is typically reliant on either proving, disproving various hypotheses. So mostly any researcher hypothesis is correct or wrong depends on this quantitative techniques, and these kind of designs are often disadvantageous, especially in social science studies, because these are very complex and especially difficult when the research involves the areas which have no exact answers. So these are some cons of quantitative research approaches. So thus these research approaches are mainly of two types. One is qualitative research and second one is quantitative research. So in the next lecture we'll see data interpretation and analysis, why it is important, data interpretation is important, why, and how the analysis can be carried out. So we'll stop here. Thank you.